They thought she was broken. They thought she was desperate. So they sent her a wedding invitation. Not out of kindness, out of cruelty. They wanted to watch her suffer while her ex-husband married a younger, richer woman. They even reserved her a seat at table 19, right next to the bathroom, right where they could laugh at her. But Beatrice Aldridge made one fatal mistake. She didn't know Sarah was bringing guests. When the church doors swung open, Sarah didn't walk in crying. She walked in wearing a dress that cost more than the centerpieces, and holding the hands of three identical 4-year-old boys. 3 boys with dark hair, 3 boys with piercing blue eyes, 3 boys who looked exactly like the groom. The triplets he never knew existed. The heirs the Aldridge family never knew they had. And the secret Sarah had been hiding for 4 years was about to turn this perfect wedding into a battlefield. But here's what nobody expected, not even Sarah. What happened next would destroy her life before it saved it. Because revenge has a price. And Beatrice Aldridge was about to make Sarah pay everything she had. This is not a fairy tale. This is a war story. And only one woman would survive. Lesson and value. Statement. Before we begin, I want you to know something important. This story is not just entertainment. It carries a message that millions of women need to hear. The lesson is simple, but powerful. The best revenge is not destruction. It is building a life so full, so meaningful, so unbreakable, that the people who tried to destroy you become nothing more than a footnote in your story. If you have ever felt alone in your battle, if you have ever been told you are not good enough, if you have ever wondered whether you had the strength to keep fighting, this story is for you. You are stronger than you know, not because you never fall down, but because you keep getting back up. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, which Sarah Mitchell would later think was appropriate. Tuesdays were her worst days. Tuesdays were when the bills came due, when the refrigerator seemed emptiest, when the weight of being a single mother to 3 boys pressed down on her chest like a physical thing. She stood in the doorway of her small apartment in Portland, Oregon, mail clutched in one hand, keys in the other, already calculating. Rent was due Friday. Lucas needed new shoes again because 4-year-olds grew like weeds. The electricity bill had a red stamp on it that meant business. And then she saw the envelope. Cream-colored, heavy cardstock, gold calligraphy that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. The return address was embossed, not printed. The Aldridge Estate, Greenwich, Connecticut. Sarah's stomach dropped through the floor. She hadn't heard that name in 4 years. 4 years of sleepless nights, of working 3 jobs while pregnant, of crying in parking lots during her lunch breaks, of telling her sons that daddy was just too busy to be in their lives. 4 years of lying. She carried the envelope inside like it might explode, setting it on the kitchen counter between a stack of bills and a permission slip for Lucas's field trip. Her hands were shaking. Behind her, the apartment was quiet. The boys were still at daycare for another hour. The silence felt heavy, judgmental, like it was waiting to see what she would do. Sarah Mitchell was 34 years old. She had dark hair that she never had time to style properly, tired eyes that used to sparkle, and hands that were always busy with something, folding laundry, packing lunches, wiping tears, holding it together. She was a senior marketing manager at a mid-sized company downtown. Not rich, not poor, surviving. She drove a 2019 Honda with Cheerios crushed into the back seats and a check engine light that had been on for 6 months because she couldn't afford to find out what was wrong. She was nobody special, just a woman who had made the mistake of marrying into the wrong family. Sarah opened the envelope. The invitation inside was everything she had expected and worse. Thick paper, elegant script. The kind of attention to detail that screamed old money and new cruelty. The honor of your presence is requested at the wedding of Garrett William Aldridge and Meredith Elizabeth Banks. Saturday, June 15th. The Aldridge Estate. Black tie. Below that, in smaller script, a handwritten note in familiar handwriting. Beatrice Aldridge's handwriting. We do hope you can attend, dear. We know how difficult things must be for you these days. Table 19 has been reserved in your name. Sarah read it twice. 3 times. Table 19. She had been to enough Aldridge events during her brief, disastrous marriage to know what that meant. Table 19 was by the kitchen doors. Table 19 was next to the bathroom. Table 19 was where you put the people you wanted to humiliate but couldn't quite get away with not inviting. They wanted her there. Beatrice wanted her there. Not out of kindness or closure, but out of cruelty. They wanted to show her what she had lost. They wanted to rub her face in Garrett's new life, his new bride, his new happiness. They wanted to remind her that she was nothing. Sarah set the invitation down. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something else had replaced the fear now. Something colder. Something that had been sleeping for 4 years and was just starting to wake up. They had no idea what they were inviting. The front door burst open and 3 small tornadoes exploded into the apartment. "Mommy!" Lucas led the charge, all wild hair and boundless energy. Mason followed quietly behind, clutching a drawing he had made at daycare. Ethan brought up the rear, already whining about something, his shoes untied as always. 3 boys, 4 years old, identical in all the ways that mattered, dark hair like their father, blue eyes that held a secret genetic marker the Aldridge family had carried for generations. A particular way of tilting their heads when confused that was so painfully familiar, it made Sarah's heart clench every time she saw it. Garrett's sons. Garrett's heirs. The children the Aldridge family didn't know existed. "Hey, babies." Sarah scooped Ethan up before he could trip over his shoelaces, kissing his forehead. "How was school?" Tyler said, "My shoes are ugly," Lucas announced, flopping onto the couch with theatrical despair. "Well," Sarah said, carrying Ethan to the kitchen and pointedly sliding the invitation under a stack of bills. Tyler's mom has a live laugh love sign in her bathroom, so maybe Tyler isn't the authority on style. Lucas giggled. "What does that mean?" "It means we don't take fashion advice from people who think decorative towels are a personality." The boys didn't understand the joke, but they laughed anyway because their mother was smiling, and that was enough. Sarah started dinner on autopilot, her mind spinning in 1,000 directions at once. She had kept this secret for 4 years. 4 years of protecting her sons from the family that had thrown her away like garbage. 4 years of raising them alone, loving them fiercely, building a life from the wreckage of her marriage. And now Beatrice Aldridge had handed her an invitation to destroy everything. The question was whether she was brave enough to accept it. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend, Diana. "You home? Coming over. Bringing wine. Need to vent about my ex." Sarah typed back quickly. "Doors unlocked. I have something to show you." 20 minutes later, Diana Roberts swept into the apartment like a force of nature. She was 38, divorced, hilarious, and the only reason Sarah had survived the last 4 years. Diana had held her hair back during morning sickness. Diana had babysat 3 newborns, so Sarah could work night shifts. Diana had been there for every breakdown, every victory, every moment that mattered. Diana took one look at Sarah's face and froze. What happened? Diana set the wine down. Who died? Did your boss fire you? Did one of the boys eat something weird again? Remember when Ethan ate that crayon and we had to call poison control? No one died. Sarah pulled the invitation from under the bills and handed it over. "Read this." Diana's eyes scanned the paper. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to pure, righteous fury. "Girl," Diana said slowly, "this invitation has more shade than a solar eclipse. We know how difficult things must be for you." She might as well have written, "Come watch what you missed out on, peasant." She put me at table 19. Table 19? That's not even a real table. That's where they put the ex-wife and the cousin who got drunk at Thanksgiving and punched Uncle Jerry. Diana looked up. "Please tell me you're not actually considering going." Sarah didn't answer. Diana's eyes went wide. Sarah Mitchell, have you lost your entire mind?" "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "But I've been thinking. For 4 years I've been hiding, protecting the boys from that family, protecting myself. And what has it gotten me? I'm tired, Diana. I'm broke. I'm raising 3 kids alone while their father lives in a mansion and doesn't even know they exist. And you think crashing his wedding is going to fix that?" "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that those boys deserve to know where they came from. And I think that family deserves to know what they threw away." The apartment was quiet, except for the sounds of the boys playing in the living room. Lucas was building something with blocks. Mason was drawing. Ethan was talking to himself in a language only he understood. 3 perfect little boys who had their father's eyes and their mother's heart. Diana stared at her friend for a long moment. Then she picked up the wine, opened it, and poured 2 very large glasses. "Okay," Diana said, "if we're doing this, we're doing it right. Tell me everything." And Sarah did. The story of how Sarah Mitchell became a single mother to triplets began, like most tragedies, with love. She had met Garrett Aldridge 5 years ago when she was working as a waitress at a high-end restaurant in Manhattan. He had come in alone, looking lost and sad in a way that expensive suits couldn't hide. She had brought him coffee and a slice of pie he hadn't ordered, and somehow that small act of kindness had sparked something neither of them expected. Garrett was different back then, or maybe she had just wanted him to be different. He was kind, attentive, genuinely interested in her life and her dreams. He didn't care that she was a waitress, that she came from nothing, that her father had left when she was 12 and her mother worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. He loved her. She was sure of it. What she didn't understand until too late was that Garrett's love came with conditions. Conditions set by his mother, Beatrice Aldridge, the matriarch of a family that traced its lineage back to the Mayflower and guarded its bloodline like a dragon guarding gold. Beatrice had hated Sarah from the first moment they met. She was too common, too poor, too wrong for her precious son. The wedding had been a battleground. The marriage had been a siege. Sarah had lasted 3 years. 3 years of passive-aggressive comments at dinner. 3 years of being excluded from family photos. 3 years of Beatrice whispering poison in Garrett's ear until he started to believe it too. 3 years of being told, in 1,000 small ways, that she would never be good enough. The divorce had been Beatrice's idea, but Garrett had signed the papers without looking Sarah in the eye. He had handed her a check for $15,000, called it a generous settlement, and turned his back on the woman he had promised to love forever. Sarah had found out she was pregnant 2 weeks later. Diana listened to the story in silence, nursing her wine. When Sarah got to the part about discovering 3 positive pregnancy tests in a Planned Parenthood bathroom, Diana reached over and squeezed her hand. "Why didn't you tell him?" Diana asked quietly. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I tried. God, Diana, I tried so hard. I called him 47 times. I went to his office, I sent letters, but Beatrice had already poisoned the well. Security escorted me out every single time. His assistant told me to stop calling or they would get a restraining order. She paused, remembering the worst day of all. And then Beatrice came to see me. The memory was still sharp, even after 4 years. Beatrice Aldridge, standing in Sarah's tiny studio apartment, looking around with undisguised disgust. The older woman had been wearing a coat that cost more than Sarah's rent. "I know you're pregnant," Beatrice had said. "One of my contacts at the hospital informed me. And I want to make something very clear." She had pulled out a checkbook with manicured fingers. "This is $15,000. You will take it, and you will disappear. You will not contact my son again. You will not tell anyone about this pregnancy. And if you try, I will destroy you." Sarah had been 29 years old, terrified, and alone. What choice did she have? "She threatened to drag me through court for years," Sarah told Diana. "She said she would demand a paternity test, claim the babies weren't Garrett's, accuse me of trying to trap him. She said that by the time she was done with me, I would be bankrupt and broken. She asked me if that was what I wanted for my children." Diana's jaw tightened. That evil witch. "So I took the money. I moved across the country. I had the boys alone in a hospital in Portland, with no one in the room except a nurse who held my hand during labor, and I raised them by myself, working 3 jobs, never asking for help from anyone because I was terrified that if I made too much noise, Beatrice would find us and take them away." Sarah looked at her friend. "For 4 years, I've been lying to my sons. Every Father's Day at school, they make cards for someone special because I can't tell them the truth. Every time they ask why they don't have a daddy, I change the subject. I'm tired, Diana. I'm tired of protecting a man who doesn't deserve protection." Diana was quiet for a long moment. Then she set down her wine glass and met Sarah's eyes. "Okay," Diana said. "Here's what I don't understand. You've kept this secret for 4 years. You've built a life. The boys are healthy and happy. Why now? Why risk everything by walking into that woman's house?" Sarah picked up the invitation again, running her fingers over the gold calligraphy. "Because they invited me to watch what I missed out on," Sarah said. "They want to humiliate me. They want to show off Garrett's new life, his new bride, his perfect family. And they have no idea that while they were planning this wedding, I was raising 3 heirs to the Aldridge fortune." She looked at Diana with fire in her eyes. "They want a show? I'll give them a show." Diana studied her friend for a long moment. Then slowly, a smile spread across her face. "Girl," Diana said, "I have watched you work 3 jobs while pregnant. I have held your hair back while you had morning sickness, and then drove you to your shift. I have babysat those boys more times than I can count. If you think I'm missing the moment Beatrice Aldridge finds out she has 3 grandbabies she's never met, you are out of your mind." She picked up her wine glass and raised it. "This is my Super Bowl." Sarah laughed. The first real laugh she had allowed herself in days. "How are we going to do this? I can't afford anything fancy to wear." "Lucky for you," Diana grinned. "I have a closet full of revenge dresses I bought after my divorce and never wore. We're going to Nordstrom Rack and TJ Maxx, and we're going to look like $1,000,000 for approximately $200. And the boys? Target has a sale on kids' suits. Navy blue. Classic. Those babies are going to look like tiny princes." Sarah shook her head, amazed to spite herself. "You're really doing this with me." Diana reached over and took her hand. "Sarah Mitchell, you are the strongest person I know. Not because you don't break down, but because you break down and then you get back up. Every single time. If you're going to walk into the lion's den, you're not walking in alone." The boys had finished playing and wandered into the kitchen, drawn by the sound of their mother's voice. Lucas climbed onto Diana's lap. Mason leaned against Sarah's leg. Ethan demanded to be picked up. 3 perfect boys who had no idea that their lives were about to change forever. "Mommy?" Lucas asked, tugging at Diana's hair. "Why are you and Auntie Diana drinking grown-up juice and talking in your serious voices. Sarah looked at her son, at all three of her sons, at the Aldridge blue eyes that stared back at her, innocent and trusting. Because, Sarah said slowly, we're planning a trip. A very important trip. And you boys are coming with us. Where are we going? Mason asked quietly. Sarah smiled, and for the first time in 4 years, the smile reached her eyes. To meet some family you've never known. The Aldridge estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, looked exactly like Sarah remembered it. Intimidating, ostentatious, cold. She sat in the passenger seat of Diana's 2017 Nissan Altima, watching the wrought iron gates grow larger through the windshield. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure Diana could hear it. In the back seat, the boys were strapped into their car seats, a chaos of juice boxes and crumbs and questions that never stopped coming. Are we there yet? Ethan asked for the 100th time. Almost, baby. Why do rich people have so many trees? Lucas wanted to know. Because they can afford them, Diana muttered, slowing down as they approached the security checkpoint. What's that? Mason pointed at a topiary shaped like a swan. That's a bush someone paid too much money to torture, Diana said. Rich people do that. They shape bushes into animals because they have too much money and not enough therapy. The security guard approached Diana's window. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, and an expression that suggested he already knew they didn't belong here. Names? Sarah Mitchell and Diana Roberts. Sarah leaned forward so the guard could see her face. I'm on the guest list. Table 19. The guard consulted his clipboard. His frown deepened. Sarah Mitchell. You're in Lot C, shuttle service. Diana's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but Sarah kept her voice calm. I'll be parking in the main lot, Sarah said. These are Garrett Aldridge's sons. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The guard looked at her. Then he looked at the back seat, at 3 small faces peering at him through the window. 3 pairs of blue eyes, the Aldridge blue. He saw it. Sarah could tell by the way his face went pale. The resemblance was unmistakable. I need to call someone, the guard said, reaching for his radio. You do that, Sarah replied. We'll wait. 3 minutes later, the gates swung open. No shuttle, no Lot C. They drove straight up the main driveway, past Bentleys and Mercedes and cars that cost more than Sarah's apartment. Diana whistled low. Girl, we are not in Kansas anymore. Just find a parking spot. Sarah's voice was steadier than she felt. And Diana? Thank you for everything. Diana reached over and squeezed her hand. You got this, Mama. Now let's go ruin some rich people's day. The wedding was being held in the estate's formal gardens. 500 guests, according to the invitation. White roses everywhere. A string quartet playing something classical and expensive. Waiters in white gloves, circulating with champagne that probably cost more per bottle than Sarah's electric bill. Sarah smoothed her dress. It was deep green, rented from Rent the Runway, the nicest thing she had worn in years. Diana had done her hair. Her makeup was careful but not overdone. She looked good. Not rich, not glamorous, but good. Real. The boys looked better. Navy suits from Target, white shirts, tiny clip-on ties. Mason had already spilled juice on his jacket. Ethan's shoes were untied. Lucas was asking loudly why the chairs were shaped like that. They looked like exactly what they were. 4-year-old boys in an unfamiliar place. Curious and a little overwhelmed. Garrett's sons. Sarah took a deep breath and started walking toward the ceremony area. The whispers began almost immediately. Is that who I think it is? What is she doing here? Are those children with her? Sarah kept her head high. She had learned a long time ago that confidence was 90% performance. You didn't have to feel brave, you just had to act like you were. The usher at the ceremony entrance looked at her with barely concealed disdain. Ma'am, this section is reserved for immediate family. Sarah looked him dead in the eye. I know, she said, and then she walked past him and sat down in the front row. The gasps were audible. Sarah ignored them. She helped Mason into his seat, shooshed Ethan before he could complain about his shoes, and pulled out a small bag of crackers to keep Lucas occupied. $300 she couldn't afford for plane tickets and a hotel room. $200 for their outfits. Every penny of her emergency fund gone, but she was here, in the front row of Garrett Aldridge's wedding, with his sons. Worth it. The approach of clicking heels made Sarah look up. Beatrice Aldridge was gliding toward her like a shark through water, champagne in hand, smile frozen on her face. She looked exactly the same, perfectly preserved, like something kept in formaldehyde. Blonde hair, cold eyes. The kind of bone structure that came from generations of careful breeding and absolutely no joy. "Sarah," Beatrice said. Her voice was honeyed poison. What a surprise. "I see you brought guests. Hello, Beatrice." Sarah didn't stand. "You look well? Botox?" Beatrice's smile tightened. "Genetics." Speaking of genetics, Sarah looked at her sons, who were watching this exchange with wide, curious eyes. "Boys, say hello to your grandmother." The word landed like a bomb. Beatrice's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, denial, horror, recognition. She looked at the boys, really looked, at the dark hair, the jawline, the way Lucas tilted his head, and the eyes. 3 pairs of Aldridge blue eyes staring back at her. "This is a trick," Beatrice whispered. "Would you like to take a paternity test?" Sarah asked pleasantly. "I've been waiting 4 years for someone to ask." Before Beatrice could respond, movement caught Sarah's attention. Garrett was approaching from across the lawn. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than her car, looking every inch the wealthy heir, about to marry well. But he wasn't alone. He was holding hands with a little girl, maybe 3 years old, blonde curls, Meredith's nose, Garrett's smile. Sarah's world stopped. He had another child. He had been raising another child, being a father to someone else's baby, while her sons ate cereal for dinner and wore hand-me-downs. "Mom," Lucas said loudly. "Who's that girl? Is she our sister?" Garrett froze. He looked at the boys. His face went white. "Sarah?" He breathed. "Sarah, what is happening? Who are these children?" But Sarah couldn't answer. She was too busy trying not to fall apart. There are moments that break you, not because you're weak, but because you're human. Seeing Garrett with another child, a child he had chosen to raise, while her boys asked why they didn't have a daddy. Sarah wanted to run, she wanted to disappear, but her sons were watching, and mothers don't get to fall apart. Not in public, not ever. Sarah stood up. She straightened her spine. She looked Garrett Aldridge in the eye. "These are your sons," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, even if her heart was not. "Lucas, Mason, and Ethan. They're 4 years old. They have your eyes, your chin, and that little genetic marker your family is so proud of. And in case you're wondering, yes, I have documentation." The wedding guests had gone silent. Every eye was on them. Garrett looked at the boys. He looked at the little girl, holding his hand. He looked at Sarah. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Sarah, I swear to God, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Sarah said. "Your mother made sure of that. Didn't you, Beatrice?" Beatrice had gone the color of old milk. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, and that was when the bride arrived. Meredith Banks was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect posture. She was 29 years old and had probably never experienced a single moment of genuine hardship in her entire life. She was also about to have the worst day of hers. "Garrett?" Meredith's voice was high and tight with confusion. What's going on? Who is this woman? Why is everyone staring? Garrett couldn't answer. He was still looking at the boys like they were ghosts, which Sarah supposed they were. Ghosts of a life he never knew existed. Diana appeared at Sarah's elbow, a plate of shrimp in one hand. Oh, this is better than Real Housewives, Diana murmured. Someone get me more shrimp. Sarah didn't respond. She was watching Meredith's face cycle through the same emotions Beatrice's had: confusion, realization, horror. Are those children yours? Meredith asked Garrett. Her voice was barely a whisper. He turned to her, reaching out. Meredith, I can explain. Are they yours? The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Yes, Garrett said finally. They're mine. The gasp from the crowd was audible. Phones appeared and hands everywhere. The wedding of the century was becoming the scandal of the decade. Beatrice recovered first. She always did. This is ridiculous, Beatrice announced loudly, stepping forward with her champagne still in hand. My son has clearly been ambushed by this woman. Whatever scheme she's concocted to extort money from our family won't work. Those children could be anyone's. An older man stood up from the family section. Sarah recognized him from her brief marriage. Dr. William Aldridge, Garrett's uncle, a retired physician who had always been kinder to her than the rest of the family. May I? Dr. William approached the boys with gentle curiosity. He knelt down, studying their faces. Hello there, he said softly. I'm Dr. William. Can I look at your eyes for a moment? Lucas, always the brave one, stepped forward. Why? Because, Dr. William said, I want to see something special. He examined Lucas's left eye carefully, then Mason's, then Ethan's. The heterochromia, Doctor, William said, standing up. He turned to face the crowd. The Aldridge marker, a small gold fleck in the iris. Extremely rare. Genetic. My father had it. My nephew has it. He looked at Beatrice. And these children have it. All three of them. There is no question, Beatrice. These are Garrett's sons. The murmuring from the crowd grew louder. Meredith was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. You have children, Meredith said to Garrett. 3 children. And you never told me? I didn't know, Garrett's voice cracked. She never told me. Sarah stepped forward. Her moment had come. I tried to tell you, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the silent garden. 47 times I called your office. I sent letters. I showed up in person. And every single time your mother had me removed. She threatened to destroy me if I didn't disappear. She told me she would drag me through court for years, claim the babies weren't yours, make sure I never saw a dime of support. She gave me $15,000 and told me to vanish. She turned to face Beatrice directly. So I did. I vanished. I raised 3 boys alone, working 3 jobs, never asking for help, because I was terrified that if I made too much noise, you would find us and take them away. And now you invite me here to humiliate me? To show me what I missed out on? Sarah smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Well, Beatrice, consider this my RSVP. For a moment, Sarah felt it. Vindication, victory, 4 years of pain and struggle, finally acknowledged. But then Beatrice spoke, and everything changed. You think you've won? Beatrice's voice was ice. You think you've exposed us? Let me tell you what happens now, Sarah. We're going to sue you for parental alienation. We're going to drag you through family court. And when the judge sees that you deliberately hid these children from their father for 4 years, you're going to lose custody. The murmurs from the crowd shifted. Sarah could hear them. She does have a point. 4 years is a long time to hide children from their father. That does seem extreme. Sarah's blood went cold. She hadn't thought about this. In her desperate attempt to protect her children, she might have handed Beatrice the weapon to take them away. Diana grabbed her arm. We need to leave. Now. They gathered the boys quickly. Ethan was crying, confused by all the yelling. Mason had gone silent and withdrawn. Lucas was asking questions that Sarah couldn't answer. As they rushed toward the parking lot, Sarah heard Beatrice's voice carrying across the garden. "Enjoy your last few months with them, dear. Our lawyers will be in touch." The drive back to the hotel was silent except for Ethan's sniffles. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. "Mommy?" Lucas's voice was small. "Did we do something wrong?" Sarah turned around, forcing herself to smile. "No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. Mommy did. Mommy might have made a terrible mistake." But looking at her sons, at their worried faces and their Aldrich eyes, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She would fight. Whatever came next, however hard the battle, she would fight for them until her last breath. Because that's what mothers do. The lawsuit arrived 3 days after they returned to Portland. Sarah was at work, trying to focus on a marketing presentation, when the process server found her. Emergency custody motion. Sterling versus Mitchell. The Aldridge legal team was claiming parental alienation, willful concealment of children, and demanding full custody of all 3 boys. She read the documents in the break room, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the pages. "They want to take my children," Sarah whispered to Diana that night, after the boys were in bed. "They actually want to take them." Diana had come over immediately, armed with wine and righteous fury. "They can't do that, can they? I mean, you had reasons. Good reasons." "Reasons don't matter in family court," Sarah said bitterly. "What matters is who has more money for lawyers. And that's definitely not me." The next morning, Sarah met with Patricia Caldwell, the best family attorney she could afford, which meant the best family attorney who would accept a payment plan. Patricia was in her 50s, experienced, and refreshingly honest. "I won't lie to you," Patricia said, reviewing the documents. "You have an uphill battle. 4 years of concealment looks bad. Regardless of your reasons, Beatrice has resources. She can drag this out until you're bankrupt. What are my chances?" Patricia paused. "If this goes to trial?" 50-50. Maybe less. Sarah absorbed this like a blow to the stomach. "Here's what no one tells you about fighting for your children," she thought. "It's not about right or wrong. It's about money. It's about who can afford the better lawyer, the longer battle, the more expensive experts. Justice isn't blind. She's got a price tag." 2 weeks later, Sarah lost her job. Her boss called her into his office with an expression of practiced sympathy. "Sarah, your work has been excellent, but certain donors to our company have expressed concerns. The Aldridge family has connections. I'm sorry." They gave her 2 weeks severance and a cardboard box for her belongings. That same week, Lucas had a severe episode at school. His ADHD had been getting worse with all the stress at home. He needed to see a specialist. The specialist didn't take her insurance. The cost was $3,000 out of pocket. Sarah sat at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning, looking at her bank account. $2,847. Rent was due in 2 weeks. 3 catastrophes in a row. The lawsuit, the job, the medical bills. Each one would have been devastating on its own. Together, they were trying to bury her alive. Diana found her crying over the bills the next night. "I can't do this," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was strong. I thought I could fight them. But I'm just one person against an army." Diana sat down across from her and took both her hands. "Listen to me," Diana said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know, not because you don't break down, but because you break down and then you get back up. Every single time. I don't know if I can get up this time. Then let me help you." Diana squeezed her hands. What's the next thing? Not the whole battle, just the next thing. Sarah wiped her eyes. I need to call my lawyer. Good. And after that, I need to make the boys breakfast. And after that, I need to find a job. Diana nodded. One thing at a time. That's all any of us can do. One thing at a time. Sarah took a shaky breath. Her eyes fell on the stack of bills, the lawsuit papers, the mess of her life spread across the kitchen table. When you're drowning, she thought, everyone tells you to stay positive. But positive thinking doesn't pay bills. What saves you isn't optimism. It's one foot in front of the other, one phone call at a time, one application at a time. Survival isn't pretty. It's not inspirational. It's just refusing to stop. She reached for her phone and called 211, the United Way helpline. She applied for SNAP benefits. She asked Diana if she could borrow money for groceries, which were the hardest words she had ever said. And then she started looking for a new job. The deposition was scheduled for a Friday. Sarah flew back to Connecticut on money she didn't have, leaving the boys with Diana. She wore her one good suit, the same one she had worn to job interviews before everything fell apart. The conference room at the Aldridge lawyer's office was designed to intimidate. Mahogany walls, expensive art, a team of attorneys who probably billed more per hour than Sarah made in a week. Beatrice sat at the head of the table, looking smug. Garrett sat beside her, but Sarah noticed something different about him. He looked tired, haunted, like he hadn't slept in weeks. The lawyers grilled her for hours. They twisted everything. So you admit you never informed Mr. Aldridge of the pregnancy? I tried. I was blocked, threatened. Do you have proof of these alleged threats? She gave me a check. Told me to disappear. A generous severance, perhaps. The lawyer smiled like a shark. Do you have recordings? Written documentation? Sarah's heart sank. She didn't. It was her word against Beatrice's, and Beatrice had an army of lawyers to make her word sound like gospel truth. And then Garrett spoke. Stop! Everyone turned to look at him. Beatrice's face went pale. Garrett, be quiet. Let the lawyers handle this. I said stop. Garrett stood up, and for the first time since Sarah had known him, he looked like a man instead of a boy hiding behind his mother's skirts. This is wrong, Garrett said. This whole thing is wrong. The lead attorney tried to intervene. Mr. Aldridge, I strongly advise that you let us proceed with the deposition as planned. Garrett ignored him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. I went through my mother's files last night, Garrett said. I found the security logs from 4 years ago. Sarah came to my office 17 times. She was removed every time. I found the check stub. Payment to Sarah Mitchell, $15,000. Beatrice was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. And I found this, Garrett said. He pulled out a piece of paper. A letter, in my mother's handwriting, dated 4 years ago, threatening to accuse Sarah of being an unfit mother if she ever tried to contact me again, threatening to claim the babies weren't mine, threatening to destroy her. He placed the letter on the table. I didn't know, Garrett said, looking at Sarah with tears in his eyes. I swear to God, I didn't know. She intercepted everything. She told me you had moved on, that you wanted nothing to do with me. Sarah stared at the letter, at the evidence that proved everything she had been saying for 4 years. She had hated Garrett. She had told herself he was a coward, a monster, a man who had abandoned his children. And he was, partially. He should have fought harder. He should have questioned his mother. But he was also a victim. Beatrice had manipulated them both. Their anger had been pointing in the wrong direction all along. I'm dropping the custody suit, Garrett said. You will do no such thing. Beatrice's voice was shrill. Those children are Aldridge heirs. They belong with this family. They're not heirs, Mother. Garrett's voice was firm. They're children. Children you kept from me. Children you threatened. I'm done. He walked out of the conference room without looking back, and Beatrice was left alone with her lawyers and her schemes and the ruins of everything she had built. Sarah should have felt triumphant. She should have felt vindicated. The letter proved everything. Garrett was on her side. The custody suit was dropped. But she had learned enough about Beatrice Aldridge to know that it wasn't over. Women like Beatrice didn't surrender. They regrouped. 2 days after the deposition, Child Protective Services showed up at Sarah's apartment. The knock came at 7 in the morning, while Sarah was making breakfast and the boys were fighting over who got to use the blue cup. She opened the door to find 2 people in professional attire holding clipboards. Ms. Mitchell? I'm Karen Reynolds from Child Protective Services. We've received a report concerning the welfare of your children. We're required to investigate all reports. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What kind of report? The CPS worker consulted her clipboard. Anonymous. Concerns about unsanitary living conditions and questions about your mental stability. Sarah knew immediately who had filed that report. Beatrice couldn't win in court, so she was trying a different approach. Attack from the shadows. Weaponize the systems meant to protect children. The investigators searched her apartment. They looked in closets, in the refrigerator, under beds. They interviewed the boys separately, which meant Sarah had to stand in the hallway and listen to strangers ask her children if Mommy ever hurt them or forgot to feed them. It was humiliating. It was terrifying. And it was completely unfounded. The investigation found nothing. Of course it did. Sarah's apartment was small but clean. Her boys were healthy and loved. There was no abuse, no neglect, no cause for concern, but the damage was done. That night, Sarah sat on her bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, crying silently so the boys wouldn't hear. The tiles were cold beneath her. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Everything hurt. Diana found her there. She had let herself in with her spare key after Sarah didn't answer her texts. Hey. Diana crouched down beside her. Hey, look at me. I can't do this anymore. Sarah's voice was raw. I thought I was strong. I thought I could fight. But she keeps finding new ways to hurt me. And I'm so tired, Diana. I'm just so tired. Diana sat down on the cold floor beside her friend. You know what my therapist told me after my divorce? Diana asked. She said you don't have to feel strong to act strong. You don't have to believe you can do this. You just have to do the next thing. One thing. That's it. Sarah wiped her nose. What's the next thing? Tomorrow morning, you call your lawyer. You tell her about the CPS investigation. You document everything. And after that? You make the boys breakfast. You kiss them goodbye for school. You show up for another day. And after that? Diana smiled gently. You keep going, one thing at a time, until you look up one day and realize you've made it through. Sarah leaned her head against her friend's shoulder. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You don't need to thank me. That's what sisters are for. They sat there on the cold bathroom floor until the sky started to lighten outside the window. 2 women who had both been through the fire, holding each other up. The next morning, Sarah called Patricia. They documented the CPS investigation. They traced the anonymous report back to a phone number associated with Aldridge Industries. They built a case for harassment. And slowly, piece by piece, the tide began to turn. Garrett called a week later. It was the first time they had spoken since the deposition. I want to see them, Garrett said. His voice was hesitant, uncertain. The boys, my sons. Sarah, I know I don't deserve it. I know I failed you, but I want to know them. Please. Sarah thought about hanging up. She thought about all the ways this man had hurt her. All the times his weakness had allowed his mother to destroy her life. But she also thought about Lucas, Mason, and Ethan, about the questions they asked every Father's Day, about the empty space in their lives where a father should have been. Every child deserves to know where they came from, even if where they came from was complicated. Okay, Sarah said finally, you can see them, but on my terms. You come here to Portland, you stay in a hotel, you visit them in supervised settings until I decide you can be trusted, and Beatrice never, under any circumstances, comes anywhere near my children. Agreed, Garrett said immediately. Whatever you want. I'll do whatever you want. And bring Legos, Sarah added. They hate trains. There was a surprised pause on the other end of the line. Then, for the first time in their entire painful history, Garrett laughed. Legos, he said. Got it. Sarah hung up the phone and looked at the photo on her refrigerator. 3 boys grinning at the camera, gap-toothed and wild-haired and perfect. She wasn't sure this was the right choice. She wasn't sure about anything anymore. But she knew that she couldn't keep running forever. At some point, she had to stop and face the complicated truth of her son's heritage, even if that heritage came with a monster mother-in-law and a lot of expensive legal bills. One thing at a time, she reminded herself. One thing at a time. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of her apartment, watching a scene she never thought she would see. Garrett Aldridge was sitting on her living room floor, covered in Lego pieces, trying to build something that Lucas kept insisting was a spaceship, even though it looked more like a deformed giraffe. That's not right, Dad. Lucas grabbed a piece from Garrett's hand. The rockets go on the bottom. Right. Of course. Rockets on the bottom. Garrett glanced up at Sarah with an expression of helpless amusement. I'm learning so much today. Mason was sitting beside him, quietly sorting Lego pieces by color. He didn't talk much, but Sarah noticed he had moved closer to Garrett over the past few months. Small signs of trust, hard-won and precious. Ethan was demonstrating his new skill of doing a somersault, which mostly involved flopping sideways and then announcing Te Dii with great enthusiasm. It wasn't a fairy tale. Garrett was still awkward with the boys. He used big words they didn't understand. He stiffened when they hugged him unexpectedly. He brought toys that were too advanced and made choices that showed how little he knew about 4-year-olds. But he showed up, every other weekend, without fail. He flew from Connecticut to Portland. He stayed in a modest hotel instead of something fancy. He learned their favorite foods and their bedtime routines and which stuffed animals each boy needed to sleep. He was trying, and slowly, painfully, it was starting to matter. The custody case had settled 3 months ago. Not in a dramatic courtroom showdown, but in mediation with lawyers over weeks of careful negotiation. Sarah got primary custody. Garrett got visitation every other weekend and alternating holidays. Child support was backdated for 4 years, which helped with the mountain of bills that had accumulated during the fight. Beatrice was barred from any unsupervised contact with the children. If she wanted to see her grandsons, she had to go through Garrett, and Garrett had made clear that he would never allow it. It wasn't a total victory. Sarah hadn't wanted Garrett in their lives at all. But the boys needed to know their father. And Garrett, against all her expectations, was becoming someone worth knowing. Sarah had a new job now. Marketing director at a nonprofit that helped single mothers navigate the family court system. It paid less than her old corporate position. It meant more. She worked with women who reminded her of herself. Women who were fighting for their children against systems that weren't designed to help them. Women who needed someone to tell them that they weren't alone, that survival was possible, that one foot in front of the other was enough. Diana called it her revenge career. Sarah called it finding her purpose. "Okay, boys," Sarah announced, clapping her hands. "Time to get ready. You're spending the weekend with your dad, remember?" Lucas jumped up immediately. Are we going to the park with the big slide? Garrett nodded, climbing to his feet and brushing Lego dust off his jeans. Big slide park. Ice cream after. And I brought that new dinosaur movie you wanted to see. The one with the meteor? The one with the meteor. Mason pulled on Garrett's sleeve. He still didn't talk much, but he had started initiating contact. Can we get the chocolate ice cream? Not the vanilla kind. Garrett smiled down at him. Chocolate. Got it. No vanilla. Ethan demanded to be picked up, which Garrett did, without hesitation, now. 6 months ago, he would have frozen at the unexpected request. Today, he lifted his son like it was the most natural thing in the world. We'll have them back Sunday night, Garrett said to Sarah as he gathered the boys' weekend bags. Same time as always, Sarah nodded. Drive safe. And Garrett, he paused at the door. 3 small boys swirling around his legs, like excited puppies. Thank you, Sarah said quietly, for showing up, for trying. Garrett's expression softened. Thank you for letting me. After they left, Diana emerged from the kitchen, where she had been pretending not to eavesdrop. How you feeling? Diana handed Sarah a cup of coffee. Weird, Sarah admitted. Good, weird. He's actually trying. People can change. Sometimes, yeah. Sarah watched the empty driveway where Garrett's rental car had just pulled away. Sometimes they can. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, working on a proposal for the nonprofit. They were trying to establish a fund to help mothers afford legal representation in custody battles. It was the kind of work that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Now it felt necessary, essential, the only thing that made sense. Her phone buzzed, a text from Diana. Wine night tomorrow? I need to debrief about my date with the accountant. Spoiler alert, he talked about spreadsheets for 45 minutes. Sarah smiled and typed back, your place or mine? Yours. My apartment smells like the fish I tried to cook. Keyword, tried. Sarah laughed out loud in her empty apartment. It echoed off the walls where her son's artwork was taped, where their shoes were scattered by the door, where evidence of their chaotic, beautiful life was everywhere. She had survived, more than survived. She had built something from the wreckage of her marriage, from the ashes of Beatrice's cruelty, a home, a purpose, a family. Not the family she had imagined, something messier, something harder, something more real. The best revenge isn't destruction, Sarah thought. It's moving on. It's building a life so full that the people who tried to break you become irrelevant. She closed her laptop and went to bed, sleeping better than she had in years. 1 year after the wedding disaster, Sarah received a package. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Unremarkable, brown paper, no return address. She almost threw it away as junk mail, but something made her hesitate. A feeling, a warning. She opened it at the kitchen table after the boys were in bed. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. Thought you should know what she's planning next. A friend. Sarah stared at the note for a long moment. Then she plugged the USB drive into her laptop. It was a recording, audio only. 2 voices she recognized immediately, Beatrice Aldridge and someone else, a man, older, professional sounding. The trust documents are clear, the man was saying. The boys will inherit from the Aldridge family trust when they turn 18. That's $30 million, split 3 ways. As their grandmother, you have no automatic claim to guardianship of the funds. Beatrice's voice was cold and calculating. There must be a way. Those children are Aldridge heirs. The money should stay in the family. The only way would be if the court determined that their mother was unfit. The man continued. If guardianship of the children was transferred to you, you would automatically become guardian of their trust as well. And how would we establish that she's unfit? We would need to document instances of neglect or instability. Build a case over time. Wait for her to make a mistake. There was a pause. Then Beatrice's voice again, colder than ice. Then we wait, and we document. The moment she slips up, we strike again. The recording ended. Sarah sat in the silence of her kitchen, staring at the laptop screen. Her hands were shaking. It wasn't over. It had never been over. Beatrice wasn't fighting for her grandsons because she loved them. She was fighting for $30 million, and she was willing to wait years, decades if necessary, to get it. Sarah's first instinct was fear. Her second was exhaustion. How many times would she have to fight this woman? How many battles before the war was finally won? But her third instinct was something else entirely. Determination. She picked up her phone and dialed Patricia's number. Patricia, it's Sarah Mitchell. I need to see you tomorrow. It's about Beatrice Aldridge. And no, it's not over. The next day, Sarah sat in Patricia's office and played the recording. Patricia listened with an expression that grew increasingly grim. Where did you get this? Anonymous tip, Sarah shrugged. I have a guess about who sent it, but I can't prove anything. This changes everything. Patricia leaned forward. This isn't just harassment anymore, Sarah. This is evidence of a planned conspiracy to fraudulently obtain guardianship. Combined with the letter Garrett found and the CPS complaint we traced back to her, we have a pattern of behavior. What does that mean? It means we can file for a restraining order. Patricia pulled out a legal pad. It means we can report her to the bar if her lawyer was involved in the scheme. And it means that if she ever tries to file for custody again, we have evidence that her motives are financial, not paternal. Sarah absorbed this. Can you keep her away from my children, permanently? I can try, Patricia said. Nothing in family law is permanent, but with this evidence, then I think we have a very good chance. They filed the restraining order that week. The documentation was extensive. The letter, the security logs, the CPS complaint, the recording. A pattern of harassment spanning years. Beatrice's lawyers tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. 2 months later, Sarah received official notification. The restraining order had been granted. Beatrice Aldridge was prohibited from contacting Sarah or her children, directly or indirectly, for a period of 5 years. Violation would result in criminal charges. It still wasn't over. Sarah knew that. Beatrice would find new ways to scheme, new angles to attack. Women like her never truly gave up. But for now, for the first time in years, Sarah could breathe. She called Diana that night. It's done, Sarah said. The restraining order went through. Girl! Diana's scream of joy was so loud, Sarah had to hold the phone away from her ear. That evil witch finally got what she deserved. We need to celebrate. Champagne, cake, fireworks. I was thinking more like pizza and a movie with the boys. That works too. I'll bring the pizza, you pick the movie. And Sarah? Yeah? I'm proud of you. For everything. You did it. You actually did it. Sarah looked around her small apartment. At the crayon drawings on the refrigerator, at the scattered toys, at the evidence of 3 small lives, chaotic and beautiful and entirely her own. We did it, Sarah corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. That's what sisters are for, Diana said. That's what sisters are for. 3 years later, Sarah Mitchell stood before a congressional subcommittee on family court reform. The hearing room was packed. Reporters, advocates, other mothers who had fought battles similar to her own. Diana sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Miss Mitchell, the committee chair, said, "Thank you for being here today." Can you tell us, in your own words, what happened to you? Sarah leaned toward the microphone. Her hands were steady. Her voice was clear. 6 years ago, she began, I was a single mother raising 3 children on my own. Their father didn't know they existed because his mother had threatened and manipulated me into hiding them. When the truth came out, I thought justice would be served. Instead, I was sued for custody. I lost my job. I was investigated by Child Protective Services on false charges, and I was nearly bankrupted trying to defend myself against a wealthy family with unlimited legal resources. She paused, gathering herself. I was lucky. I had a friend who supported me. I found a lawyer who believed in me. I documented everything, saved every receipt, recorded every threat, and eventually the truth came out. She looked directly at the committee. But most mothers aren't that lucky. Every day, women across this country are being destroyed by a family court system that favors wealth over justice. They lose custody of their children because they can't afford lawyers. They're accused of parental alienation by abusive ex-partners. They're investigated and harassed and worn down until they have nothing left. I'm here today to tell you that this system is broken, and I'm here to ask you to fix it. The testimony lasted 2 hours. Sarah answered questions about her experience, about the tactics Beatrice had used, about the gaps in the law that allowed wealthy individuals to weaponize the courts against vulnerable parents. When it was over, Diana met her in the hallway. You were incredible, Diana said, hugging her tightly. I'm so proud of you. I was terrified, Sarah admitted. The whole time, I kept thinking they were going to laugh at me or tell me my experience didn't matter. Your experience matters, Diana said firmly. And now the whole country knows it. 6 months later, the Mitchell Amendment was signed into law. It established new protections for parents facing malicious custody litigation, including provisions for courts to sanction parties who filed frivolous motions and requirements for judges to consider patterns of harassment in custody decisions. Sarah watched the signing ceremony on television, surrounded by her sons. Mom, Lucas asked, why is that man on TV talking about you? Because your mom is a hero, Diana said, ruffling his hair. She changed the law so that other mommies don't have to go through what she went through. Lucas considered this. Cool. Can we get ice cream? Sarah laughed, wiping tears from her eyes. Yeah, baby, we can get ice cream. As they piled into the car, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on the amendment. You should know that Beatrice Aldridge has been charged with witness tampering and harassment related to your case. She pled no contest. Thought you would want to know. Sarah stared at the message. Then she put her phone away and focused on her children. Some victories were quiet. Some justice came slowly. But it came, that night, after ice cream and dinner and bedtime stories. Sarah stood in the doorway of her son's room and watched them sleep. Lucas was sprawled across his bed, one arm hanging off the edge. Mason was curled in a tight ball, his favorite dinosaur tucked under his chin. Ethan had kicked off his covers, as he did every night, and was snoring softly. They were 7 now, growing so fast she could barely keep up. Lucas was thriving with his ADHD treatment, channeling his energy into soccer and art. Mason had started talking more, making friends at school. Ethan had outgrown his night terrors and developed a passion for building things. They asked about their grandmother sometimes. Sarah was always honest. She's someone who made bad choices, Sarah told them. Someone who hurt people because she wanted things she couldn't have. But you don't need to worry about her. She can't hurt us anymore. The boys accepted this with the resilience that children have. They had their mother, their Aunt Diana, their father, who showed up every other weekend without fail. They had a family that wasn't traditional, wasn't perfect, but was real, and that was enough. Sarah closed their bedroom door softly and walked to the kitchen. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime sounds. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had cried over bills and legal documents and the seemingly impossible task of surviving. She had survived. More than survived. She had won. Not in the way she had imagined, not in the way the movies showed. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no moment of total triumph. Justice had come slowly, in pieces, through years of hard work and documentation, and refusing to give up. But it had come. The best revenge, Sarah thought, isn't destruction. It's building a life so full that the people who tried to break you become irrelevant. Beatrice Aldridge was a footnote now. A cautionary tale. A woman who had spent millions of dollars and years of her life trying to destroy someone, only to be defeated by a single mother with nothing but determination and a good friend. Sarah raised her glass to the empty room. To survival, she said quietly, to refusing to stop. And then she finished her wine, washed the glass, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new battles to fight. That was the nature of life, especially life as a single mother. But Sarah Mitchell was ready. She had been through fire and come out the other side. She was ready for anything. The graduation ceremony was held on a Saturday in June, exactly like the wedding had been all those years ago. But this was different. This was better. Lucas, Mason, and Ethan Mitchell stood on the stage of Portland Lincoln High School, waiting to receive their diplomas. They were 18 years old, tall and handsome, with their father's blue eyes and their mother's stubborn determination. Sarah sat in the audience, crying openly and without shame. Diana sat beside her, equally tearful, equally proud. "Look at them," Diana whispered. "Sarah, look at our babies. They're not babies anymore," Sarah managed. "They're men. They're always going to be babies. Our babies." The principal called their names one by one. Lucas Mitchell, heading to Stanford to study environmental science. Mason Mitchell, accepted at Juilliard for classical piano. Ethan Mitchell, taking a gap year to travel, before starting at MIT for engineering. 3 boys who had grown up in a small apartment with a single mother, who had worn hand-me-downs and eaten cereal for dinner, who had asked why they didn't have a daddy and accepted complicated answers with grace. 3 boys who had become remarkable young men. Garrett was there too, sitting a few rows back with his daughter from his marriage to Meredith. That marriage had lasted 6 years before ending, predictably, in divorce. But Garrett had continued showing up for his sons every other weekend for 14 years. He wasn't a perfect father, but he was a present one. Beatrice Aldridge had died 2 years ago, a heart attack, sudden and unexpected. Sarah had felt nothing when she heard the news. The woman who had tried to destroy her, who had stolen years of her life and millions in legal fees, was gone. And Sarah felt nothing. That, she thought, was the real victory. Not revenge, not triumph, just indifference. Beatrice had become so irrelevant that her death was merely a piece of information, filed away and forgotten. After the ceremony, the family gathered for photos. Sarah and Garrett standing awkwardly together with their sons, the complicated history between them visible in the space they kept. Diana inserting herself into every shot, crying and laughing simultaneously. "Mom," Lucas said, pulling Sarah aside, "I wanted to give you something." He handed her an envelope. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was a letter. Sarah recognized it immediately. The threatening letter Beatrice had written 14 years ago, the evidence that had turned the tide. I found it in your files when I was helping you clean out the garage, Lucas said. I showed it to Mason and Ethan. We talked about it for a long time. Sarah didn't know what to say. We never really understood, Lucas continued. When we were kids, you tried to explain, but we didn't get it. The lawsuit, the investigation, all of it. We just knew that things were hard sometimes and that you always seemed tired. Sarah nodded, tears threatening again. But now we understand. Lucas put his hand on her shoulder. We understand what you did for us, what you sacrificed, how hard you fought. You kids were worth it, Sarah managed. Every second of it. We know. Lucas smiled. And for a moment, Sarah saw the 4-year-old boy who had asked why rich people had so many bushes shaped like animals. That kid is still in there, she thought, under all the grown-up layers. We want you to have something too, Lucas said. From all 3 of us. He pulled out another envelope. This one thicker. The trust, Lucas explained. Grandmother's trust. We inherited it last month when we turned 18. $30 million, split 3 ways. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had tried not to think about the money, tried not to let it influence anything about how she raised her sons. We talked about it, Lucas continued, about what to do with it, and we all agreed. He opened the envelope and showed her the documents inside. We're using $10 million to start a foundation, Lucas said, the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Single Mothers. It's going to provide legal aid to mothers fighting custody battles, pay for lawyers they can't afford, help them survive the way you survived. Sarah couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. And the rest? Lucas grinned. We're putting it in trust for our own kids someday, starting the cycle over, but doing it right this time. No secrets, no manipulation, just a safety net for the next generation. Sarah pulled her son into a hug, holding him tighter than she had in years. I don't deserve this, she whispered. You deserve everything, Lucas said. Mom, you gave us everything. This is just us giving a little bit back. Mason and Ethan appeared, drawn by the commotion. Soon, all 3 boys were wrapped around their mother, a tangle of arms and tears, and 18 years of love. Diana captured it on her phone, crying too hard to hold the camera steady. That evening, after the party and the photos and the endless congratulations, Sarah sat alone on her apartment balcony. The city spread out below her, lights twinkling in the darkness. She was 52 years old. Her hair was gray at the temples now, her face lined with the evidence of hard years and good ones. She was still nobody famous, still nobody important in the grand scheme of things. But she had raised 3 extraordinary children. She had changed a law that would help thousands of mothers. She had survived everything a cruel woman and an unfair system could throw at her. And she had done it one step at a time, one day at a time, one foot in front of the other, until she looked up and realized she had made it through. Diana appeared in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of champagne. Room for one more? Always. Diana settled into the chair beside her, handing over a glass. Hell of a day, Diana said. Hell of a life, Sarah corrected. They clinked glasses and drank, watching the city lights below. You know what I keep thinking about? Diana asked. What? That invitation. The wedding invitation. 14 years ago. The one that started all of this. Sarah laughed. The one that was supposed to humiliate me? The one you turned into your origin story. Diana grinned. You walked into that wedding with nothing but 3 kids and a rental dress. And you walked out with the beginning of everything. Sarah considered this. I was terrified, you know. The whole time I was terrified. I know I was there. But I did it anyway. That's what courage is, Diana said. Not feeling brave, just doing the thing anyway. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 friends who had been through fire together and come out the other side. Do you ever wonder what would have happened, Sarah asked, if I hadn't gone to that wedding, if I had just thrown the invitation away and kept hiding? Diana shook her head. No point in wondering. You went. You fought. You won. That's the story. Sarah nodded slowly. That's the story. She thought about her sons, sleeping in their childhood bedrooms one last time before scattering to different corners of the country. She thought about the foundation that would bear her name, helping mothers she would never meet. She thought about all the battles fought and won and lost, all the tears shed, all the moments of despair that somehow transformed into moments of triumph. If you're watching this, Sarah thought, addressing some imaginary audience, some future mother fighting her own battle, I want you to know something. You're not alone, and you're stronger than you think. Not because you don't fall down, because you keep getting back up. That's the only superpower any of us have, getting back up, refusing to stop, putting one foot in front of the other until we look up and realize we've made it through. Diana raised her glass one more time. To surviving, Diana said. Sarah smiled and raised her glass to meet it. To surviving, she agreed, and to everything that comes after. The champagne was cold and perfect. The night was warm. The city hummed below them, full of stories they would never know and battles they would never fight. But their story, at least, was done, and it was a good one. And that is where our story ends. But maybe, just maybe, your story is just beginning. If Sarah's journey touched something inside you, if her words reminded you that survival is possible, I have a small favor to ask. Hit that like button. Not for me, for every woman out there fighting a battle nobody sees. Let them know they are not alone. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done in Sarah's place? Would you have walked into that wedding? I read every single comment, and your story matters too. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. A friend, a sister, a mother. Sometimes one story can change everything. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and tap that notification bell, because every week we bring you stories like this. Stories of strength, stories of survival. Stories that remind you what you are capable of. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for being part of this community. And thank you for believing that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. I will see you in the next story. Closing statement. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team. Every word was chosen with purpose. Every scene was crafted with intention. Our goal is not just to entertain you, but to bring meaning, inspiration, and valuable life lessons to every viewer. We believe stories have power. The power to heal, the power to teach, the power to remind us who we really are. Thank you for trusting us with your time. We do not take that lightly. Until next time, keep fighting, keep rising, keep being the hero of your own story.